West, a bit more cloud here and some brisker winds, so temperatures holding up that little bit higher perhaps. As we go through tomorrow morning then, it is going to be turning quite quickly, quite cloudy and a bit wet across the far west of Scotland. A brighter, drier part for eastern parts of Scotland and northeast England too. Cloud quickly spilling across Northern Ireland, so a grey start here and a bit damp in some parts as well. Some showers down the western side of England and Wales. For more central and eastern parts, it is going to be a mostly bright start, though there could be some high-level cloud making the sunshine a little bit hazy. Across central eastern parts of England, it is going to turn a bit cloudier as we go through the day, but staying largely dry. However, towards the north and west, we have that feature I mentioned at the start, and this is going to bring some very wet and windy weather, turning really pretty unpleasant. Feeling unpleasant then towards the northwest, but in the southeast, temperatures getting into the low 20s, so warm enough in any sunshine. More wet weather to come as we go through Thursday. The system will gradually make its way southeastwards, but it breaks up, diminishes a little bit as it goes. So in the southeast, just seeing a bit of cloud, bit of rain. It won't be as intense or as impactful as the wet and windy weather we're going to see in the northwest. Another spell of wet weather coming through on Friday, but signs of something drier through the long weekend.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Don't miss out on your chance to win a whopping £30,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. It's extra cash that could really make a difference to your coming year. You could find yourself on that holiday you've always wanted to take, buy that treat that always seemed out of reach, or just send some of those day-to-day financial stresses packing. £30,000 could be yours, but time is ticking. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
It's 9 p.m. I'm Patrick Christys. Tonight,
If it feels like neighbourhood policing has vanished, it's not around you. We haven't seen a police while I've been here, and I've been here for a little while now.
is Foreign Secretary David Lammy now an international laughingstock? And
turbocharge the work that we need to do on that energy transition.
The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
Is Keir Starmer about to bankrupt you to hit ridiculous green targets? Plus,
we're not having it. We're going to keep this fight up and we'll keep going until we get an agreement that we can support.
well, and he's won, hasn't he? Has Mick Lynch of the RMT just been offered a bumper pay rise as well? Who's next as Labour pay their union mates? And
Sanulli, Petrillo sul finale.
that man is running as a woman at the Paralympics, but he's hit back against his critics.
I thought the Queen was incredible. I mean, think of it, all those years, 75 years, she's almost never made a mistake.
Well, a new biography says the late Queen slammed Trump, but is it really true? I will talk to a palace insider. Plus,
I take my methadone in the morning, take 5 Valium of these, and then crack cocaine.
Scotland tops the drug death league table. Are the SNP to blame? On my panel tonight is broadcaster and columnist Esther Krakow, the director of the Centre of Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe, and journalist Jonathan Liss. Oh, and what happens next here? Get ready, Britain. Here we go. Can Britain survive 5 years of Starmer? Next.
Well, good evening. It's 2 minutes past 9. The latest news from the GB News Centre. New video has been released showing the moment a British super yacht disappeared from view in a major storm off Sicily early on Monday morning. The grainy security camera footage shows the 75-metre-tall mast of the Bayesian just visible through the torrential rain and storm-force winds. The mast eventually disappears as the vessel tips over and sinks. Efforts by divers to reach inside the wreck are being hampered by debris. The body recovered yesterday has been formally identified as the vessel's chef, Canadian Ricardo Thomas. Among those unaccounted for is British businessman Mike Lynch and his daughter. Well, David Tabizel is the friend and former business partner of Mike Lynch. He spoke exclusively to Michelle Dewberry earlier tonight and said if anyone can survive, his friend can.
Any chance of him surviving this, he has the strength to do this, and I hope that we aren't talking the past tense. He is a remarkable man, and if you've had the blessing and the honour to have worked with him or known him, he's a force of nature and somebody who I think will become a business and intellectual and scientific legend in the decades to come.
The US Secretary of State has arrived in Doha this evening as frantic efforts continue to secure a peace deal to end the war in Gaza. Anthony Blinken, speaking in the last few moments, said he would do everything possible to get Hamas on board with the proposed bridging deal after Israel said it was prepared to accept the interim proposals. Meanwhile, the Israeli military says it's recovered the bodies of 6 hostages who were captured during the 7th of October attacks. Israeli military spokesman Daniel Hagari vowed to double down on efforts to ensure the return of the remaining hostages. Emergency services in Lincolnshire were called to rescue dozens of people at a seaside pleasure park earlier this evening. The incident at Botton's Pleasure Park in Skegness followed a malfunction of one of the rides. Lincolnshire police confirmed 25 people were stranded in mid-air for a number of hours, while fire service personnel attempted to get them down safely. Police have also confirmed none of those trapped suffered serious injuries. King Charles has visited Southport today to meet survivors of last month's stabbing attack, which left 3 schoolgirls dead and others injured. His Majesty also took time to meet members of the public who showed up for the visit. Earlier, he spoke to some of those who provided support in the aftermath of the attack. And he also thanked emergency service personnel who dealt with both the stabbings and the riots that followed. Well, that's it. You're right up to date with the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Patrick.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Is the Prime Minister living up to his nickname, Sir Flip-Flop? He told us it will be a government of service.
I invite you all to join this government of service.
It turns out he might have meant serving as union paymasters. We've got the junior doctors, ASLEF teachers, NHS staff, and then today the RMTs, Mick Lynch, marched into the Department of Transport. And then Starmer said this about taxation.
We will not raise tax on working people. No tax rises for income tax, for national insurance, for VAT. We will not raise income tax.
OK, well, who's going to pay for all that stuff then? And he said that he'd be all about growth.
Our focus is on growth. That's been the missing ingredient for the last 14 years. It's been slightly the missing ingredient in this campaign as well, because we're not talking enough about how we grow the economy and create wealth.
But offering whopping great big pay rises without any conditions for a better service will just cause inflation, not growth. And then he suddenly wants people to be able to work from home more, despite that meaning that fewer people will be on trains into work, nullifying the point, really, of his bumper trains deal. He slammed the Tories for considering cancelling winter fuel payments for pensioners.
Last year, the Prime Minister was apparently drawing up plans to remove the winter fuel allowance from pensioners. So will he now rule out taking pensioners' winter fuel payments off them to help fund his £46 billion black hole?
And now he's doing it himself. He said this as well about the Channel migrant crisis.
I think that we can smash the vile gangs that are running this trade, that are making a fortune putting people into boats and breaching our border security. I'm not prepared to put up with that, and that's why I think the serious answer is to smash the gangs.
And then he scrapped Rwanda with no plan B and hasn't even got started getting to work on his new border command. He put this guy in charge of prisons.
We're addicted to sentencing. We're addicted to punishment. So many of the people who are in prison, in my view, shouldn't be there. A lot should, but a lot shouldn't.
Now we've got Operation Early Dawn to find every single way to lock people up for longer, even for online comments. If Sir Keir Starmer told you it was raining, you'd probably want to go outside and check, wouldn't you? Can Britain survive 5 years of this Prime Minister? Let's get the thoughts of my panel. We've got columnist and broadcaster Esther Crackey, director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe, and journalist Jonathan Liss. Esther, I'll start with you. Do you think Britain will survive 5 years of the man who's been nicknamed Sir Flip-Flop?
No, but I wasn't expecting enthusiasm to decline this precipitously. Look, he was. We always think that when a new government comes in, there's sort of a sense of things are going to get better. Keir Starmer didn't have any of that enthusiasm. Maybe Rachel Reeves, because she seemed like the most competent member of his cabinet. But in general, there was no great enthusiasm for him to begin with. And then just a few weeks into his premiership, you see this sort of chaos erupting. I mean, there's no money. Apparently, the Tories left the economy in a terrible state, but there is money to be basically kowtowing to all these public unions. So that's inconsistent. You know, you're stripping pensioners of their winter fuel payments, but you have money to pay train drivers, even though trains will eventually become either obsolete or driverless. There's so many inconsistencies in a lot of the things he says. You know, we want to focus on economic growth, okay, but there are no tax cuts coming in. Energy prices are probably going to stay high. There's not been any discussion about long-term energy, sort of our mix or pricing or anything like that. Where is the economic growth going to come from? It looks like taxes are going to go up in the autumn budget. So, I mean, there are lots of inconsistencies. Forget even just the enthusiasm. Really, he seems quite like an absentee prime minister. He's just kind of hiding and trying to wheel out members of his cabinet when it's relevant. But he doesn't even seem to believe in his own vision, if he has one.
Well, this is, I mean, Stephen, you know, what are we now, 6 weeks or so in? and he promised the government of service. He said, you know, the adults are back in the room and all of that. Can you actually trust a single word this guy says?
You couldn't trust it before and you can't trust it now. I mean, look, this is the man that tried to avoid actually doing any debates in the way that Kamala Harris is trying to do so in America. They're hiding the fact that they couldn't really do anything that's everything was about a very well-constructed argument about saying nothing. And when you get bland people doing bland issues, this is what happens when reality hits the face. There's no adults in the room. This is children still at university, just on their first week. This is like their first week in university where they're enjoying themselves. The fact is, will we survive? A nation survives, but will we thrive? Absolutely not. And I look at one particular figure that's going to really come down on them over a period of time. Our national debt is rising. The Conservatives have a huge amount to do with this, and I'm not allowing Labour to get off the hook on this either when they get involved. But it's 110 billion a year. That's 10.8% of our actual national income. 4.5 billion is just an increase in 1% of VAT. If we wiped out that 110 billion debt, we'd have no VAT. Wouldn't that improve the nation of our country?
Just to contextualise,
they won't do that. They're just going to...
We spend more servicing our debt, just the interest payments, than we do on the army, on defence and police combined.
Yeah, but
so
if you're going
just to contextualise where our
agree,
priorities
but if you're going to start spending more on your doctors, on your kind of train drivers, this is what you're going to have, and this is why the decline of Britain will continue.
What has Keir Starmer done right so far?
I mean, give the guy a break. He's been in power for 6 weeks. Obviously, quite a few of those are taken up by the worst civil unrest we've had in, sort of like 13 years, which actually a majority of the public think that he handled quite well. And I happen to agree with them. That's obviously, as Esther points out, there has been a decline in popularity in the government. And I confess that happened faster than I thought, because the only major thing that's happened the riots, which also a majority of people think he handled quite well. Look, I think that we have to bear in mind that there's going to be a long 5 years, OK? And there are going to be a lot of things that Labour does wrong in that time. And when it does those things wrong, Patrick, you know me, I will come on and I will tell you when I think they've done things wrong. I think that there is a risk of over-egging the pudding and saying that everything's falling apart, and it becomes a bit like the boy who cries wolf, because things are not falling apart. Obviously, things have gone terribly in sense of the riots, but that's not at Labour's door. No one sensible will blame Labour for what happened.
Will you blame him for taking off money from people like my mother, who's not going to have the winter fuel allowance, who is not earning a fortune, as is the 11 million pensioners in this country who will now suffer because of...
Which is ironic.
Stephen, I actually did criticise the Reeves move on that. And I have to say, Patrick, it's not scrapping the winter fuel payment, it's means testing it. So the poorest pensioners, in theory, will still get it. But obviously, there is an issue about very, very rich pensioners who are claiming benefit they say they don't need. I happen to think the means testing is not a particularly progressive way of doing things anyway, because the means testing itself sort of overbalances, or outweighs the saving that you make anyway. So there are all kinds of reasons not to means test things. But obviously, the government has to find money. We all agree with that. The question is how they find it.
Yeah, indeed. And when it comes specifically to one of the major issues that's rearing its head at the moment is the early doors negotiation / non-negotiation that they've got. I mean, you've basically got a procession of union barons with an empty bag walking into various different government departments, asking them to fill that bag up with cash and then leave. I mean, it's not a particularly good start there.
Well, it's not. And again, this is where I think listening to the public is probably wiser, because not all unions, or not all striking unions, are made the same. People have a lot more sympathy with junior doctors, for example, and nurses than train drivers and university lecturers. So, for instance, the pay rise that train drivers were most recently offered would put the average about around 70k. Most junior doctors don't see 70k for the first 10 years of their career. And the reason why, when people say we should be listening to the public, it's not because it gives you a bargaining chip and something to leverage on. If you're going to spend the public's money and just, kowtow to the interests of train drivers, well, people are thinking, we won't always need these train drivers. We can take coaches. People have adjusted, but we will always need our doctors and nurses. These are the kinds of decisions that highlight or signal that this is a government that's serious, that the adults are actually back in charge, and not just saying it, but actually doing it.
Yeah, so one of the key issues that we've got right now, 6 weeks into Labour, is this issue with the unions and potential inflation and taxpayers' money with that. Another issue, I suspect, is the idea that he's maybe becoming across as quite authoritarian when it comes to things like social media and when it comes to response, in some respects, to the riots. Is that also a problem?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, there's two-tier policing has existed since Robert Peel actually put policing in place. You know, I've been doing a lot more research on this since we looked at it, and when we see the way that the judges acted in Peterloo, the way the judges acted in the Chester riot, the way they did it in, right going back to Cromwell's period, this is absolutely something that we've seen here. It's a class issue. Very much. These are working class people. We're in charge. We're acting like snobs. We're going to put you in prison straight away. But the fact is, nowadays, people are seeing this differently. They're seeing people being put away for standing outside a riot, and a judge turning around saying just watching it is a crime. That isn't acceptable in this country. Throwing bricks and putting them through windows, get to prison straight away. Everyone agrees. But there's a level down there, and the way that he has actually enacted himself, almost though he is a modern-day Cromwell on this, shows me that there is a lack of trust in the British people, in our judicial system, and using it to crack down in a very unequal and unfair way. This won't bear well in the long term.
Some quite scathing comments there. It looks as though they're physically pained you, Jonathan.
I think that we have to be realistic about what's happened, that Labour has not introduced any new sentencing guidelines in its 6 weeks in power. It has not been, Shabana Mahmood has not been present in the courts to hand down sentences. True. Everything that you're complaining about would have happened under the Conservative government. So you may have a point in some respects about how we prosecute things, about the level of sentence, and we've had many conversations about whether some sentences are too lenient in this country, whether some sentences are too harsh. You can say that about some comments that you might make on social media, which you then delete, which you can go to jail for, or being present on a Zoom call, talking about blocking the M25 and getting 4 years for it. You know, this is not two-tier policing. There is a question about whether you might have an inconsistency in sentencing, which is not the same issue.
My argument is there is two-tier policing because it's based on snobbery.
Okay.
Well, and the arguments of the language that he used as Prime Minister is not unifying language, it's very divisive language. It wasn't really understanding the causes and issues of which the vast majority of them. I would have rather him turned around and pointed down to those who were distinctly involved in the crimes rather than being more broad brush that he was. And I think that's his problem.
Could I just take a very quick straw poll before we move on then? So however far into this Labour government we are at the moment, has it gone better or worse than you thought it would have done?
Worse, because I'm surprised by how tone-deaf they are.
I think it's just exactly how I thought it would be.
This is exactly. Well, Patrick, no one could have predicted the riots, but I think the Labour's done pretty well, actually.
OK, all right. Well, hey, a range of views. There we go. Good stuff. It's a lively start. Thank you very, very much. Now, we do have a cracking topic coming your way, because coming up, the Scottish Government effectively decriminalised drugs in Scotland about 3 years ago, yet they continue to top the drug death league table. So are the SNP to blame? LBC's former political editor Theo Usherwood casts his expert eye over those shocking stats. Plus, a Tory leadership contender has admitted using Ozempic, the weight loss drug, all right? Have they been fat-shamed? All of that is coming your way shortly. But next, Keir Starmer has set out his plan to turbocharge the path towards net zero.
Turbocharge the work that we need to do on that energy transition.
The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
But will Labour's green vision actually make you poorer? Director of Net Zero Watch, Andrew Montford, goes head-to-head with environmental scientist Professor Christys Dunn. It's live and it's next.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Ben, do you like baking?
Baking? Only flapjack.
Why flapjack?
It's just a childhood favourite. Otherwise, no, I don't have time to do anything, no.
Yeah.
No, do you?
I love baking.
Really?
Yeah, I find it really relaxing.
You never bring in any treats for me.
I know, I was thinking
Scones
that's going to come next,
cakes?
isn't it? Scones.
Oh, it's my birthday next week.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh.
You know what to do?
I've
You're not
really
here,
dug
are
a
you?
hole for myself now, haven't I? No, I actually am here next week.
OK, well, you know what to do then.
OK. I'm delighted to say that we're joined now by JP from Bridget's Bakery.
BB is the brand, is the face, is the smile. She originated the motto, making London smile, so that's what we try to do on board of our lovely buses and in our shops.
Which is probably the most British thing you could imagine.
Yes, we try to do a 3-in-1. We try to really embrace all of the culture and history, so Roadmaster buses, 1970s. Oh, nice pictures. We have the full afternoon tea, 1700.
JP, is it scone or scone? And also, where does the word come from?
Ben.
Is it of French origin?
Ben, how very dare you asking me? Are you trying to actually put me under the spotlight? I would say, according to a Belgian person, it's scone.
Scone.
Exactly.
Oh, that's what
so I
you
like
say.
to do a mix of both. But I would say...
Sorry, JP.
Common as muck. and another key question which many Brits get tangled up in is it the jam first or the cream first?
So, I'll tell you a very scientific fact I just made up on my way here this morning. The best way to eat your scone or scone is, first step, you split it in two halves.
Yeah.
On one half, you do the cream and jam. The other half, the jam and cream.
Oh, no.
Then, if you feel like people are looking at you, you should squash it together. And if really the tension is quite high, you should give your scone to the nearest person holding a chef jacket. There you go.
That sounds too diplomatic.
Yeah.
The People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. Are you comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister?
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Patrick Christys tonight. Now, coming up, was publishing alleged remarks by the late Queen about Donald Trump disrespectful to the memory of our great monarch? Former senior gardener to the King, Jack Stooks, gives his unique insight. I want to find out, really, what happens to people in that royal circle who leak information to biographers and the press. But first, it's time for our head-to-head. Sir Keir Starmer visited Wales today to announce Labour's plans to make Britain an energy superpower by setting us on a plan to decarbonise at all costs.
I'm here looking at what's a very important renewable project to discuss with the First Minister how we can work more closely together on the renewable projects of the future to turbocharge the work that we need to do on that energy transition.
Ironically, for someone talking about energy, there wasn't a lot of it there, was there? But with energy bills set to rise by £150 next year, Tory leadership candidate Robert Jenrick hit back at the Prime Minister's plan to turbocharge the road to net zero. He said, the UK is only 1% of the world's emissions. There's no prizes for being the first country in the world to decarbonise. We should be working towards net zero 2050, but we shouldn't be decarbonising faster than our major competitors. Now, recent research published by the Young Foundation found that some 40% of UK households could fall into what's called transition poverty. All right? But what do you think? As Keir Starmer sets out his plan to turbocharge the path to net zero, will Labour make Britain poorer? Let's get our thoughts now of the two people going head-to-head on this. We've got the Director of Net Zero Watch, Andrew Montford, and environmental scientist, Professor Christys Dunn. Chaps, always a pleasure. I will start with you, Andrew, if that's OK. Do you think that Keir Starmer is going to make us poorer in this pursuit of net zero?
Absolutely. He's intending to do what we've been doing for the last 20 years, but faster. And for the last 20 years, electricity prices have gone up almost every year. I think it's something like 17 out of the last 22 years we've seen electricity price rises. That's almost completely the fault of renewables. So doing more of it is inevitably going to put prices up even higher. But the problem is that the grid is now reaching the point that things are going to get worse rather quickly. So, in fact, we should be expecting to see electricity prices actually accelerating away. Now, the situation's made rather worse because we also have a war in Ukraine and the Middle East is in turmoil, and that's pushing gas prices up. So that's making things worse as well. But yeah, we're in trouble whichever front you look on.
I get that, but I look at things like that, and the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It was ever thus, right? So the idea that we keep using that as some kind of excuse seems a little bit odd to me. But Professor Christys Dunn, I'll bring you in now. Why should we just give Ed Miliband a bag full of cash so he can play the ukulele near a wind farm?
Well, I most certainly don't want him to be doing that, I have to confess. But should we be giving him a bag of cash? This is a tricky one, because if we don't take action now, then the cost eventually is going to be far greater if we're then having to face the consequences of climate change. I mean, that sea level rise, excessive flooding, changes in our cropping patterns, all sorts of huge issues which are facing people now and are only going to increase. So we have to do something. That's should be, hopefully, a given. How we do that, though, that's the tricky bit. And I really don't like well, obviously it's good, head-to-head's always good, but confrontation with an issue of such importance. We should be trying to work together on this. And I think Net Zero do a fantastic job of kind of highlighting some of the issues, without a doubt. But we have to do something about this. And we have to think as a society, rather than how much it's going to cost individuals, because this is going to cost individuals money, and that's awful. But we need a government to be taking a lead on this. And we're always saying that why do governments only think in 5-year terms and all this? But when a government is trying to think longer term, people say, oh no, it's going to cost me more money, this is terrible. Well, we need that leadership. We need, whichever government it is, I don't care what colour it is, we need a government to be taking us in the right direction.
I think the harder sell, and I'll put this to you, Andrew, is this: why the heck do we have to be first? Why the heck do we have to be this world leader in it? I mean, as Robert Jemrick said there, there doesn't appear to be any prizes for coming first, I don't think, apart from maybe we bear the initial brunt of the cost. I don't know. What do you think about that? Do we have to be the first?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's two things to say there. One is I would take issue with Christian's position that we have to do something about this. That's essentially a religious approach to the question, to say we just have to do it. The rational approach is to say, do the costs outweigh the benefits? And that case has never been made. The government's never put forward a proper cost-benefit analysis of net zero. So, that's something we should be able to agree on, that we should do this rationally. Now, if we do need to do it, should we be the ones doing it first? Well, no, almost certainly not. There are people with more money than us, better technology than us. And this has become a way for our political leaders to grandstand and to say, look, we're leading, look at me, I'm taking the world is following me. Except, of course, the world isn't following us. The rest of the world is largely carrying on regardless. China, India are just digging up coal and burning it just as fast as they possibly can, because they know what real poverty is, and their people are not going to accept intermittent energy or no energy at all, and so their governments are leading the way with fossil fuels. We are just, we are almost a laughing stock now, because we are destroying our own economy on what is essentially a wild goose chase.
Well, I'll put exactly that to you, Christian. Are we at serious risk of becoming an international laughing stock by deliberately destroying our own economy?
Okay, well, before I will have to obviously confront the religious side of climate change. I'm a scientist, so I'm looking at the science in the same way that I would use modern medicine to make myself better. I believe, if you want to say that, the science when it comes to climate change. However, are we going to become a laughing stock with this? Well, if Britain can lead the way, then we should. We led the way on so many other issues throughout history. And if we can lead the way on this, perhaps we should still have some pride in our country, and perhaps we should be leading on this. But also, crucially, what I would stress is that who gets first in all this cutting emissions is irrelevant, really. What is important is by cutting emissions, we're going to be adding so many benefits to our society, especially in terms of the economy in the long term as well. There are so many different advantages to this, rather than...
Like what? Go on. Why are they? Come on.
Well, by cutting emissions, eventually, especially if we don't just go with renewables, if we do look at things like nuclear, for example, which we should be looking at, we will have far cheaper electricity and abundant electricity. And we'll also have less pollution. We'll have cleaner rivers. We'll have such a better place to live. You know, we've got things like nature-based solutions, which is what we should be incorporating this to kind of store and capture carbon. We could move on, but there's so many advantages to this if we think long-term rather than just short-term.
OK, but I do think we have reached some kind of consensus there, although the question of whether or not we think this is worth it is obviously we have a point of difference. But this is going to cost us, isn't it? What Labour want to do at the moment, I think we can agree, is fundamentally going to cost each and every one of us. Can I get some nods or a shake of the head there? Because we are a bit out of time, but... Yeah, okay, yeah, right, OK, good. So I suppose the question is fundamentally, isn't it, whether or not we think it's worth it? Some people do think that, other people don't. Thank you very much. Great head-to-head, lovely stuff. Who do you agree with? Will Labour make Britain poorer? Gary on X says net zero is one of the biggest cons the world has ever seen. Adrian says net zero is turbocharging poverty. Joel says give the leaders a chance to lead. UK is so toxic for politicians. Well, look, your verdict is now in. 87% of you think that Labour will make Britain poorer as a result of this. Oh, 97%. Wow, we had a late surge. 97% of you agree that Labour will make Britain poorer. 3% of you say that it won't. Coming up, now, a new biography has sensationally claimed the late Queen slammed Donald Trump. Is this really true? And frankly, does this leak now disrespect Her Majesty's memory? I'm going to speak to a real palace insider. He's called Jack Stooks, who was senior gardener to the King until a month ago. All right, so he really knows what it's like in that inner circle. I want to know really what happens if you do leak information. Do you just get ousted? Plus, I'll show you what happens next here. But next, 3 years after the SNP effectively decriminalised drugs, Scotland's worst in Europe drug deaths rose by another 12% last year. So, has the SNP failed the Scots? Former LBC political editor Theo Washerwood gives his take on that, plus Labour's planned release of some 200,000 prisoners. And I'll reveal which Tory leadership contender has admitted to taking a weight loss drug, Ozempic. Have they been fat-shamed? All that and more. Next.
Good evening. Here's your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Most of today's showers are going to ease and clear away as we go through this evening and overnight, but our attention is turning to a weather system that is out in the Atlantic and is actually the remnants of Hurricane Ernesto. It's heading towards the UK and is going to bring some wet and windy weather to northwestern parts tomorrow. But for the time being, like I said, many of today's showers will be easing, some continuing though, especially across parts of Scotland and western parts of England and Wales. Otherwise, a lot of dry and clear weather around, and with those clear skies, temperatures turning a little bit on the cool side, particularly towards the east-southeast, towards the north and west, a bit more cloud here and some brisker winds, so temperatures holding up that little bit higher perhaps. As we go through tomorrow morning then, it is going to be turning quite quickly, quite cloudy and a bit wet across the far west of Scotland, a brighter, drier part for eastern parts of Scotland and northeast England too. Cloud quickly spilling across Northern Ireland, so a grey start here and a bit damp in some parts as well. Some showers down the western side of England and Wales. For more central and eastern parts, it is going to be a mostly bright start, though there could be some high-level cloud making the sunshine a little bit hazy. Across central eastern parts of England, it is going to turn a bit cloudier as we go through the day, but staying largely dry. However, towards the north and west, we have that feature I mentioned at the start, and this is going to bring some very wet and windy weather, turning really pretty unpleasant. Feeling unpleasant then towards the northwest, but in the southeast, temperatures getting into the low 20s, so warm enough in any sunshine. More wet weather to come as we go through Thursday. The system will gradually make its way southeastwards, but it breaks up, diminishes a little bit as it goes. So in the southeast, just seeing a bit of cloud, bit of rain. It won't be as intense or as impactful as the wet and windy weather we're going to see in the northwest. Another spell of wet weather coming through on Friday, but signs of something drier through the long weekend.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one
will be cancelled. Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation. You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Patrick Christys Tonight. Coming up, has whoever leaked the late Queen's alleged remarks about Donald Trump disrespected the memory of our great monarch? I speak to a former palace insider, but first, I'm very grateful to be joined by former LBC political editor Theo Usherwood. Now, 3 years ago, Scotland's SNP government effectively decriminalised drugs in what it hoped would be a magic bullet to solve the crisis. But the latest figures show that its plan to remove the stigma on Class A drugs by only issuing warnings for possession has failed, because Scotland's posted a shocking 12% increase in drug deaths to 1,172 for the year 2022 to 2023. So it's 22.7 drug deaths per 100,000 people, makes it the worst UK region by a long way. And it's 277 deaths per 1 million people, means it tops Europe's drug deaths table by a shamefully long way as well, which is pretty shocking, really, isn't it? Anyway, Theo joins me now. Has the SNP failed, really? I mean, how has it failed as well?
So I think this comes down to how do you approach the misuse of Class A drugs like heroin, primarily. And the approach that's been taken in Scotland is to, well, not to legalise it, but as you refer to it, effectively decriminalise it by saying, OK, if you're caught with a small amount of heroin that you can obviously prove you're not trying to deal, it's for your personal use, then you're going to be subject to a police warning rather than prosecution. And the hope is then that by doing that, it is possible that you don't push users underground, and you can sort of bring them in. There can be treatment rooms and so forth where they can use drugs safely with clean needles and so forth, and that actually the hope was, and initially the figures seemed to bear this out because there had been a drop in the number of misuse deaths from 2022 through to 2021 through to 2022, but then it's now gone back up again by 12%. So the feeling that if there was any optimism from having adopted this policy seems to have gone, and of course now the critics are circling and saying, well, hang on a moment, clearly if you take the approach of of saying, well, using Class A drugs isn't a matter that's going to see you brought before the courts, that actually it doesn't necessarily help because you're not necessarily controlling the supply of these drugs, you're not controlling the actual drugs that people are using. And maybe Scotland will actually, and the SNP may well use this argument to go even further in trying to control the supply of drugs as well, rather than just saying,
try to blame, well, it's Westminster really who's in charge of our health, or, it's Westminster, it's the Tories who've made cuts to a variety of different services. But I mean, how much directly is the SNP to blame?
So this is health in Scotland is a devolved matter. It's subject, it's run by the Scottish government in Holyrood. This isn't Westminster. You can, if you want to have an argument about the Barnett formula, get into the technicalities of that, go for it. But this is a policy that is specifically Scottish. It's not. It doesn't apply to the rest of the UK.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's interesting to note that. I mean, another issue that's frankly probably going to affect all of us really is, so about 2,000 prisoners apparently going to be freed early on a single day next month.
Yes.
In an attempt to tackle the overcrowding crisis. The offenders are all serving sentences of less than 5 years, will be released after serving roughly 40% of those sentences. Now, the Ministry of Justice activated emergency measures as the arrest of these rioters increased pressure on prisons. I mean, a couple of issues here. Do we know what kind of offenders these are? Are they going to be violent offenders? Are they going to be sex offenders? Who are these?
No. So the government has said that if you're in prison for domestic abuse, terrorism, sexual offences, and some violent offences, you are not going to be eligible for this scheme. And rioters or anybody convicted as a result of rioting or the violence that we've seen in the country, up and down the country, they are not going to be subject to Operation Early Dawn. So they're not going to see their prison term go from 50%, which is when you're released after halfway serving, down to 40%. It's not going to happen. But there will be, I think, questions further down the line about how does the government deal with overcrowding in prison? Because if you have, and I was speaking to Charlie Taylor, the Chief Prisons Inspector, this is a problem that would have affected any government that came in, whether Rishi Sunak won it or Keir Starmer won it, right, the election. But if you have a prison population which is running at 99% at capacity and you have overcrowding, the practicalities are that you have to lock people up for 22, 23 hours a day. And look, Patrick, you know where I stand on this, right? Retribution and a deterrent. That's why people go to prison. But there's a third reason, and that's rehabilitation, because you don't want people going back into prison, having committed another offence. But you can't do that rehabilitation work when those who are working in the prisons have no choice because of the overcrowding to simply leave inmates in their cells. So, and the other thing, and this is where I think it may get a little bit more controversial further down the line, and the government hasn't yet announced this, but they've previously rejected. Keir Starmer and Lord Timpson previously said they're not looking at it, but I think they are going to look at it further in not so distant future, and that's in what they call indeterminate sentences for public protection. And this was something that actually was introduced by Lord Blunkett during the Tony Blair years, where judges, if they looked at a particular offender and said, "You're so dangerous to the public, you pose such a threat, I'm not even going to set a jail term. You're going to go behind bars until the parole board says that you're safe," and then you can be released. And it was happening a lot during the early noughties, during the Blair years. But then, of course, Ken Clarke, the Conservative Justice Secretary, abolished it. There was an outcry about it because you're having people going to prison and never being released. But I think that Labour will go back to this in the not-too-distant future, and that counts for about 1,000 prisoners, because whilst they're not sentencing people to these IPPs, there are those who are currently in prison who are subject to them.
I suppose the major risk in the short term for Labour would be that some of these people that they release out early do go on to commit a horrific offence, and then it emerges that they were let out early, and maybe someone who did something a bit fruity on social media, which may or may not have deserved a prison sentence, but was possibly less bad than an actual murder or something, was sent to prison as a result of that person being freed. But we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully that never happens.
But the other thing is that you have people who are, awaiting their sentencing, but they want, the judges are looking at, the prosecutors are looking at saying, we want to send this person to prison, and they're just there waiting for their court date because they've got no place to put them in. And so you can say, well, actually, you could have that individual who's committed a really serious crime. They may even have admitted that, they may even be convicted, but they're out on bail and they're not behind bars because there's not a prison place available. So you get in this invidious situation.
Yeah, no, indeed. Now, I just want to round us off with a different story, actually. Now, this was quite interesting. So, Tory leadership contender Robert Jenrick has, I hesitate to use the word admitted because it sounds like he's done something wrong here, but he's admitted taking the weight loss drug Ozempic last year. So he told Politico, to be honest, I was overweight. I took Ozempic for a short period of time, didn't particularly enjoy it, but it was helpful. Since then, I've just lost weight in the normal way by eating less, eating more healthily, doing some exercise, going to the gym, going running. I've lost 4 stone in 12 months. One thing I will say about that, straight off the bat, is congratulations for losing 4 stone in 12 months, whatever way you've done it. I think that's brilliant. It did also, there's an element of this that made me chuckle a little bit, because it was the old kind of thing of, have you ever smoked cannabis? Well, I did it, but I didn't inhale, So, you've done Ozempic? Well, I did it, but I didn't enjoy it, And I thought that was quite... Has he been fat-shamed, though? By almost, because it was... Tom Tugendhat almost made him come out and say this, because he alluded to one of the other candidates there.
Look, he said he didn't enjoy it. The side effects are pretty brutal from Ozempic by all accounts. It's a family show, Patrick, so I'm not going to go into them, but you can find them on the NHS website. I think it's not just a question for politicians, it's a wider question, isn't it, where image is believed to matter. And this isn't a new phenomenon. We think back to George Osborne when he was, of course, thinking about, trying to improve his image in the Treasury. Would he potentially take over from David Cameron in Number 10? And he went on quite a stringent fitness regime that saw him doing laps and press-ups in St James's Park and having a new Caesar-style haircut and special sort of poses on the platforms at conferences and so forth. Politicians do have these, they do have these sort of makeovers. And if you're going to be leader of the opposition, there's no way around it. You're going to be on telly most days. There will be a calculation amongst those who work for Robert Jenrick that people will make some fairly instantaneous decisions, not necessarily listening to what he has to say, but just looking at his appearance and taking a view as to whether they like him or not based on that. And it's not particularly a world that I would necessarily want to live in, and I'm sure many of your viewers wouldn't want to live in, where people have those first impressions. But from Mr. Jenrick's point of view and from those who work for him, I think they've come to a view that actually he could shape up a little bit and for his public image, given that they're hoping to take this, they are taking this leadership campaign very seriously.
Yeah, indeed. Look, Theo, thank you very, very much. We've managed to whiz our way through several different top topics there. Theo Ashwood there. Coming up, this man is representing us on the global stage.
By implication, you're comparing the ERG to the Nazi Party, or at least to the South African racists. Now, whatever you think about the ERG, that was an unacceptable comparison, wasn't it?
Andrew, I would say that wasn't strong enough.
Good stuff. But as he's been snubbed now by Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu, is our Foreign Secretary bad for Britain? I'm going to get stuck into that at 10. But next, a new biography has sensationally claimed the late Queen slammed Donald Trump. Is it really true? And does the leak disrespect Her Majesty's memory? I'm going to speak to a real palace insider called Jack Stooks, who was senior gardener to the King until just a month ago. Stay tuned.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
A new exhibition at Gainsborough's house in Sudbury in Suffolk is the first to chart the artistic careers of Cedric Morris, who lived from 1889 to 1982, and Arthur Let Haynes, who lived from 1894 to 1978. They were partners in love and art for 60 years. I'm joined now by the exhibition curator, Dr. Pat Hardy. Some people will not be in the least bit familiar with these two British artists. So do you want to say a word of background about Cedric Morris and Arthur Let Haynes?
About 100 artworks were left in 2017 of Cedric Morris's works, and it was felt then that an exhibition to showcase that work would be very appealing to the public. Morris's flower paintings have had a lot of traction. They've become very popular commercially, and there's been more research done on them. So it was felt that it would be good to broaden out the flower painter aspects of Morris's work to showcase the portraits and the landscapes and protest paintings, which we now had in the collection. And it was also thought important that his partner, as you mentioned, for 60 years, Let Haynes, was also given some profile because he very much fell away into the shadows because he was promoting Morris's work and running the school, which was set up nearby, near Sudbury, near Gainsborough's house at Hadley, which was a very different type of art school. And a lot of people, both artists and locals, do remember it having been in operation and how wild it was and how bohemian they were. So it's felt to be a good story in personal terms, but also artistically to try and place these two, particularly Morris, in the 20th century art world.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Patrick Christys tonight. Now, a sensational new biography has claimed that Queen Elizabeth found Donald Trump very rude. Our late great monarch, who hosted the ex-US president twice during her reign, allegedly particularly disliked the way he looked over her shoulder as if in search of others more interesting. She's also said to have believed that Trump and his wife Melania must have had some sort of arrangement. The astonishing claims are made by a chap called Craig Brown in his new book, A Voyage Around the Queen. But do these claims now disrespect our late great monarch, who, famously was incredibly private when it came to this kind of stuff? I'm joined now by true palace insider Jack Stooks, who was the King's senior gardener until very recently. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Does this actually disrespect our Queen's memory, do you think?
Well, Patrick, thanks for having me on the show. Yes, I think completely it does. There doesn't seem any point or reason for this to have come about. So to sort of suddenly start claiming these things that somebody who has passed without giving them the opportunity to sort of defend themselves and say, well, actually, hang on a minute, that wasn't quite what was said. As we know what the Queen was like as a person. We know that in her reign, she never put a foot wrong. So why would she suddenly get to a point in her life where she suddenly goes, oh, let's put my foot wrong? It's not something she would do. It's just ridiculous.
And look, presumably this individual who's written this is going to say he's got sources to back this up. But you've been in the kind of inner circle of the palace, etc. What happens to people who do decide that they go and leak this kind of information?
I think the trouble is, the family meet and speak to so many different people around the world. And it's quite easy for people to say, oh, this was said or that was said. And to suddenly have a discussion that was misconstrued, or somebody might think that they overheard something else being said that wasn't quite true, or they sort of got the tail end of an argument or the tail end of a conversation. There's so many ways that these kind of rumors can come about. But I just can't see why the Queen would have done anything like that. It just doesn't seem or show anything that she would be that way even inclined to want to do.
And I mean, you were the King's senior gardener until very recently. What will King Charles be making of seeing these kind of inflammatory things on the front of the Mail and serialised in the Mail as well? Presumably he'll be, quite annoyed about that, will he?
Oh, completely. I don't see why people will think that it's okay in any way, shape, nor form to try and bring down the late Queen's sort of way of life. I mean, as we know how she was as a person throughout her career, she was amazing, and to have that legacy, to sort of follow that on, and to have somebody trying to sort of ignite some kind of flames into it. It's not right to do that, especially to the monarchy now today. I mean, they've been through so much. They're going through so much at the moment, and the last thing they need is to have this brought up when they're dealing with so much.
No, indeed. And presumably you got to know the King relatively well as well there. I mean, do they ever confide in people? Do they ever pass comment to you? I mean, does this kind of stuff ever conceivably happen? I'm not asking you to reveal anything if he has, of course, but, do they ever have any kind of these private, unguarded conversations with the people who work around them?
I think as they are, I mean, they are, what we sort of tend to forget is they are actually a family. So just like you or I, we might have conversations with people we trust and family and friends, and say things that are personal. That it might be something as silly as the Queen saying to her daughter, "Oh, what dress are you going to wear to such and such an event?" And people can overhear things like that and then sort of say, "Oh, isn't it great that the Queen was so normal?" And that's what we don't tend to see with the royal family, because we see them on show all the time. We don't see that side. So, of course, they are going to have personal, private conversations with their friends.
Is there a bit of a code amongst staff, though, just to never bring that up? I mean, is that a massive taboo?
What, to bring up what was said?
To gossip about it, yeah.
Oh no, completely. I mean, you know what you can say and what you can't say. Obviously, with anything, it's nice to know that they've got staff that can appreciate and respect their privacy.
I've just got to ask one thing, though, and he has gone public with this in the past, but you're the only person who I ever thought I could realistically ask this and get a straight answer to. Does the King talk to his plants?
Well, as we heard, I think it was Alan Titchmarsh who actually asked him the question on a BBC programme, and he actually said at the time, "Yes, I do." So it actually came from his very mouth.
You've got to stay with it. Look, thank you very much. I do hope to chat to you again very soon, but thank you for sharing a wonderful little insight there into what royal life really looks like. That's Jack Steeves there, who's a genuine palace insider, was the King's gardener until very, very recently. Coming up, the first transgender Paralympian has hit back now at his critics, branding them jealous. Should Valentina Petrillo be allowed to compete? Former British Olympian Mario Mauchi weighs in, but next, Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu has refused to meet David Lammy over his decision, amongst other things, to back an international arrest warrant for him. But you add that to a very long list of things, and when I come back, I'll be having a firm and frank discussion about whether our Foreign Secretary is now an international embarrassment to Britain. You're not going to want to miss that. Stay tuned.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Most of today's showers are going to ease and clear away as we go through this evening and overnight, but our attention is turning to a weather system that is out in the Atlantic and is actually the remnants of Hurricane Ernesto. It's heading towards the UK and is going to bring some wet and windy weather to northwestern parts tomorrow. But for the time being, like I said, many of today's showers will be easing, some continuing though, especially across parts of Scotland and western parts of England and Wales. Otherwise, a lot of dry and clear weather around, and with those clear skies, temperatures turning a little bit on the cool side, particularly towards the east-southeast, towards the north and west, a bit more cloud here and some brisker winds, so temperatures holding up that little bit higher perhaps. As we go through tomorrow morning then, it is going to be turning quite quickly, quite cloudy and a bit wet across the far west of Scotland, a brighter, drier part for eastern parts of Scotland and northeast England too. Cloud quickly spilling across Northern Ireland, so a grey start here and a bit damp in some parts as well. Some showers down the western side of England and Wales. For more central and eastern parts, it is going to be a mostly bright start, though there could be some high-level cloud making the sunshine a little bit hazy. Across central eastern parts of England, it is going to turn a bit cloudier as we go through the day, but staying largely dry. However, towards the north and west, we have that feature I mentioned at the start, and this is going to bring some very wet and windy weather, turning really pretty unpleasant. Feeling unpleasant then towards the northwest, but in the southeast, temperatures getting into the low 20s, so warm enough in any sunshine. More wet weather to come as we go through Thursday. The system will gradually make its way southeastwards, but it breaks up, diminishes a little bit as it goes. So in the southeast, just seeing a bit of cloud, bit of rain. It won't be as intense or as impactful as the wet and windy weather we're going to see in the northwest. Another spell of wet weather coming through on Friday, but signs of something drier through the long weekend.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We could be calling you with the news that you've won our latest Great British giveaway, an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash.
Hi, I'm John from sunny North Yorkshire, and I've just won £20,000 in the GB News Great British giveaway. It didn't cost much to enter, but of course if you're not in, you can't win. And here I am, having won £20,000, and that's tax-free, so I'm rather pleased I did it.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
It's 10 p.m. I'm Patrick Christys. Tonight,
If it feels like neighbourhood policing has vanished, it's not around you. We haven't seen a police while I've been here, and I've been here for a little while now.
yeah. Is Foreign Secretary David Lammy now an international laughingstock as well as a domestic one? Also,
we will not raise tax on working people. No tax rises for income tax, for national insurance, for VAT. We will not raise income tax.
Starmer said no taxes on working people, but
we're not having it. We're going to keep this fight up and we'll keep going until we get an agreement that we can support.
Yet another union baron looks to have Labour by the proverbials. What does that mean for your money? And
Sanulli, Petrillo sul finale.
That's a biological man there, running as a woman at the Paralympics. But he's hit back now against his critics. I've got all of tomorrow's newspaper front pages with broadcaster and columnist Esther Krakow, director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe, and journalist Jonathan Liss. Oh, and can you tell me, please, what happens next here? Get ready, Britain. Here we go. Is David Lammy really bad for Britain? Next.
Good evening. It's just after 10 p.m. The latest news from the GB News Centre. New video has been released showing the moment a British super yacht disappeared from view in a major storm off Sicily early on Monday morning. The grainy security camera footage shows the 75-metre-tall mast of the Bayesian just visible through the torrential rain and storm-force winds. The mast eventually disappears as the vessel tips over and sinks. Well, efforts by divers to reach inside the wreck are being hampered by debris. A body recovered yesterday has been formally identified as the vessel's chef, Ricardo Thomas. Those unaccounted for include British businessman Mike Lynch. Well, David Tabizil is the friend and former business partner of Mike Lynch. He spoke exclusively to Michelle Dewberry earlier tonight and said if anyone can survive, his friend can.
Any chance of him surviving this, he has the strength to do this. And I hope that we aren't talking the past tense. He is a remarkable man. And if you've had the blessing and the honour to have worked with him or known him, he's a force of nature and somebody who I think will become a business and intellectual and scientific legend in the decades to come.
The US Secretary of State has arrived in Doha this evening as frantic efforts continue to secure a peace deal to end the war in Gaza. Antony Blinken said he would do everything possible to get Hamas on board with the so-called bridging deal after Israel agreed to the interim proposals.
We're working in our different ways to try to ensure that there is not escalation, sending the necessary messages to all of the potential actors, including Iran and including Hezbollah, to avoid taking any steps that could escalate the conflict or spread it. We're united in our work with the parties to try to bring this agreement across the finish line. And Qatar and Egypt in particular are in direct contact with Hamas, working to bring it along.
Well, meanwhile, the Israeli military says it recovered the bodies of 6 hostages who were captured during the 7th of October attacks. Israeli military spokesman Daniel Hagari vowed to double down on efforts to ensure the return of the remaining hostages. Emergency services in Lincolnshire were called to rescue dozens of people at a seaside pleasure park earlier this evening. The incident at Botton's Pleasure Park in Skegness followed a malfunction of one of the rides. Lincolnshire police confirmed 25 people were stranded in mid-air for a number of hours, while fire service personnel attempted to get them down safely. Police have also confirmed none of those trapped suffered serious injuries. King Charles has visited Southport today to meet survivors of last month's stabbing attack, which left 3 schoolgirls dead and others injured. His Majesty also took time to meet members of the public who showed up for the visit. Earlier, he spoke to some of those who provided support in the aftermath of the attack. And he also thanked emergency service personnel who dealt with both the stabbings and the riots that followed. And you're right up to date. Let's get back to Patrick.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Keir Starmer's decision to make David Lammy our Foreign Secretary is looking like an absolute disaster. Many people in Britain already felt Lammy was a complete laughingstock, whether it was for this gaffe.
If it feels like neighbourhood policing has vanished, it's not around you. We haven't seen a police while I've been here, and I've been here for a little while now.
Or there was this performance on Mastermind.
Who acceded to the English throne at the age of 9 on the death of his father Henry VIII in 1547?
Henry VII.
Edward VI.
He's never been one for general knowledge. When Lammy was asked if replacing Boris Johnson was a good idea during the Ukraine conflict, he reportedly said Churchill replaced Chamberlain just days before the Second World War, Lloyd George replaced Asquith weeks into the Somme, and Anthony Eden lost his job during the Suez Crisis. But unfortunately for our Foreign Secretary, all 3 of those historical facts are wrong. There was the time that he thought the BBC was racist for asking if the smoke coming from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel as the world awaited news on the selection of a new pope would be black or white. He said, "This tweet from the BBC is crass and unnecessary. Do we really need silly innuendo about the race of the next pope?" But silly gaffes aside, he also tends to put his foot in it politically too. There was the time he slammed the then US President Donald Trump, saying Trump is not only a woman-hating, neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, he is also a profound threat to the international order that has been the foundation of Western progress for so long. Well, that might make it a little bit tricky for Britain to work with Trump if he becomes the next president. David Lammy also has form for calling people Nazis.
By implication, you're comparing the ERG to the Nazi Party, or at least to the South African racists. Now, whatever you think about the ERG, that was an unacceptable comparison, wasn't it?
Andrew, I would say that wasn't strong enough.
Yeah. And he backed calls for Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu to be arrested if he ever sets foot in Britain, which was a bit silly, given that Israel is a major ally in that region. And it also meant that when David Lammy took it upon himself to go and sort out the Middle East single-handedly, he got this reception from the Israeli premier. Yeah, that's right, he totally snubbed him. Totally snubbed him. Israel is now snubbing Britain because of David Lammy. In another epic fail, Mr. Lammy is apparently wearing a badge supporting Israeli hostages being held by Hamas. That was when he was in Israel. And then he took that badge off to go and meet the Palestinian leader, presumably thinking no one would notice, apart from the fact that we all did. Although he probably learnt that from his boss. Sir Keir Starmer was criticised for taking his poppy off when talking to the Muslim community not that long ago. Look, you add all of that together, and I wonder, is David Lammy an international laughingstock who's bad for Britain on the world stage. Let's get the thoughts of my panel. We've got columnist and broadcaster Esther Krakow. We've got the director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe, and we've got a journalist as well, Jonathan Liss. Esther, is David Lammy a massive international embarrassment for Britain?
Yes, but I don't think this occasion is the best way to that best signifies this. I don't think he's qualified. I think he's one of the poorest, actually, politicians we've had in a very long time. You used to have politicians in this country that were from all walks of life, that were very well-read, very educated. He doesn't seem to be either. That being said, I think it looks worse on Netanyahu to cancel or to snub the foreign secretary than it does on David Lammy, because you don't see sort of his predecessors in that role doing the same thing. It's very immature and childish. The UK is still an ally of Israel. If they're going to snub the foreign secretary because of something that he did, okay, what about the next foreign secretary?
Yeah,
do you only like the UK when the country or the foreign secretary does what you want?
I suspect that they might like them more if the foreign secretary didn't say that you'd arrest him if he ever set foot in Britain.
Well, he withdrew the UK's objections to the ICC case. Whatever you think about him, there has been a change in government. There are backbenchers that are putting pressure on him. Fine. That's how the nature of the democracy works. But I do think he's woefully underqualified.
OK, I mean, we've seen his performance on Mastermind there for a start. Do you think that Keir Starmer's decision to make him Foreign Secretary really cuts to the core of whether or not our Prime Minister has good judgment?
I think absolutely not. I mean, I can never forget the time that I was actually on with Andrew Neil on Daily Politics show when the debate about who would fight the Indians who fought for Britain during the Second World War, and David Lammy came out and said 1 million Indians fought for the European project.
Oh, yeah. I could have put that in there.
You could have put that. And I just thought to myself, well, you know, Hitler's European project, the project that killed millions of Jews and wanted to go on for... And that said to me, this is a man that went to Oxford. He absolutely embarrasses himself in his degree from there by his lack of historical knowledge, the lack of capability of being linguistically interesting in the way that he speaks about things, and obviously makes these mistakes on a regular basis. Yeah. And why he has made one of the most important roles in government, foreign secretary, is beyond me, other than what deal was done to ensure that Starmer was the leader and the backstabbing of Jeremy Corbyn that happened before that.
OK, Jonathan, yet again, you look pained by this.
I just think it's such a ridiculous conversation. I think David Lammy is one of the best Labour people in Parliament, actually. Look, I've interviewed him. I found him extremely intelligent and engaging. We had a conversation about all kinds of political and foreign policy issues for a magazine for several hours. I was really interested in it, and I'm not impressed by every MP I meet. I can guarantee you that, Patrick.
I think it's interesting, though, because Emily Thornberry, for instance, was snubbed of a cabinet role because she was the rumours that she was seen as a bit ditzy, a bit unqualified and all of that. I actually think Emily Thornberry has on many occasions been a lot more impressive than David Lammy. So I don't understand this.
It's not either or. Apart from she doesn't like it. It's not either or, Esther. And also, I will tell you that he wrote a brilliant book called Tribes.
He wrote it.
He wrote it.
Well, look. I thought it was...
Are we certain? There wasn't a ghostwriter involved? Were you involved?
Right. It was interesting...
I know you're a brilliant writer, Jonathan. If it's a brilliant book, I can believe you wrote it.
God, there is the perception that maybe at times David Lammy has said some stupid things, like people in the ERG are worse than the Nazis, or you know, lazy racial tropes.
We've all said stupid things, come on.
I've not tweeted about, coming out the Sistine Chapel.
Look, David Lammy, I think he's actually been a really good shadow foreign secretary. He's made a lot of good relationships. You know, you mentioned the whole thing with Trump. He's actually built quite good relationships with the Republican Party.
Just not the person who's leading it.
No, I think he's actually made inroads with some of the people around Trump. He accepts his role now is different from his role as a backbencher fighting Brexit. By his own admission, and he's not, you know, he's left that side of things behind. And you know, when it comes to the issue that we're talking about right now, when he said he's single-handedly taking it upon himself to solve the Middle East, I mean it's just nonsense. It's not true. He went with the French foreign minister. Obviously, you know, no foreign secretary just arrives in a foreign country uninvited. That's simply not what happens. He went. He met the Israeli foreign minister. He met various people. I think he met the president as well. Netanyahu is is facing indictment by the ICC. Britain is signed up to the ICC. When you make it out as though the UK government is going to go out of its way to arrest him if he comes on UK soil, the UK is a signatory, is compelled to because of the ICC.
We can ignore, yet again, we could ignore that.
No, we couldn't.
Yes, we can. We obviously can ignore it. There's no need for us to do that.
What was the point of being signed up to...
Maybe having an ally in the Middle East.
Come on. If you're signed up to it, then you're signed up to it.
Follow international law when it benefits our allies.
But we are.
I would be fascinated to see what happens if Trump wins in November.
Well, because that's
the same as what happens when Biden's president.
Can I just ask this? To not insult a future president.
Do we think that the world takes that man seriously? Because there are so many people in this country who do not take David Lammy seriously for a variety of different reasons. So do we really think that the rest of the world does?
No, I think actually a lot of people are looking at Britain as a walkover state.
No.
I think they're looking at it as the easy meat, being able to accept everything that we do. Macron's having a whale of a time with them at the moment. He can do whatever he likes over the immigration issues, and we'll just do it and accept it, because that's what Europe says.
I think the reason why people don't take him seriously is because he shows a distinct lack of wisdom. It shouldn't be said to you that one day you may be Foreign Secretary or one day you might have to deal with Trump to not tweet something like that. It doesn't matter who it is. It could have been anyone. It could have been about Trudeau. And that's the issue. It's because of the way he conducts himself. You command respect by your behaviour, it's not given to you. You earn it.
I've not heard... You know, I am very open to criticisms of various ministers, and if there are some ministers who are not taken seriously, I'd be very happy to have that conversation. I just don't think that Lammy's one of them. I haven't heard any chatter about foreign governments in the very short time that he's been Foreign Secretary, or indeed the couple of years that he was Shadow Foreign Secretary before that, about sort of thinking that he was some kind of pushover or not a serious candidate. We have had unserious Foreign Secretaries. Liz Truss was an unserious Foreign Secretary. I do not think that David Lammy is.
Okay. All right, well, yet again, a range of views. You love to see it. Now, responding to the Netanyahu snub, the Foreign Office said there was no plans to meet Prime Minister Netanyahu during this visit. This government is committed to upholding international law. We have made clear that we will not export items if they might be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law. There is an ongoing review process to assess whether Israel is complying with international humanitarian law, which the Foreign Secretary initiated on day one in office. Now, coming up, I will bring you the very first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages. I will also finally show you what happens next here. And next, the first transgender Paralympian has hit back at his critics, branding them jealous. Should Valentina Petrillo be allowed to compete? Former British Olympian Mari Yamauchi is live, and she's next.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
We haven't talked about Meghan for a very long time.
Well, this is about suicidal ideations, which apparently Meghan Markle says she was having. It's not our place to question whether that is true or not. But she's saying this, Matt, isn't she, so that we can all be aware of online harms and therefore what? we can't have anonymity online anymore?
Yeah, I think it's a bit... I mean, obviously, you know, her personal story is very affecting, and I think it will help people, you know, to hear it, to hear the issues. Because we hear issues around mental health, but we don't often hear in detail about suicidal ideation, which is that people having thoughts about suicide, not necessarily having a detailed plan to do it. So I think that's important. But then if you're going to say it's all about online harms, what do you mean? What do you want to change? What rules do you want to introduce or you know, or alter? And I think that's the issue, that it doesn't actually go anywhere.
So, because she's given us a talk in America, she's supporting a charity, all very noble. So the suicidal... It was because of what she was reading about herself online. Is that what she said?
Well, I think she thinks it because of the whole structure really of what she went through.
What did she go through?
About herself. Well, you know, she went. She thinks she's been through trial by tabloids. Others would disagree.
Oh, that again.
Emma.
That again.
I don't often agree with Meghan Markle. In fact, I never agree with Meghan Markle. Good. But actually, on this, I'm reaching a point where I think the anonymity online and the abuse and the vitriol and the violence and the threats that you can fling at people online is actually really getting too much. And I think that it is dangerous. And I do think that when you receive really hateful, blasphemous messages from people, and it's always the be kind, the kind of hate mob, the kind of, well, we know who we're talking about, they're almost 99.9% anonymous. And I think we do need to look at that.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Patrick Christys tonight. The very first of tomorrow's newspaper front pages are heading your way in a second. But first, the Paralympics' first openly transgender runner, Valentina Petrillo, has branded critics of his participation jealous. The partially sighted Italian, who transitioned in 2019, having previously won 11 national titles in 3 years, whilst competing as a married father of 2, said it's only fair that each of us can express ourselves in our own gender. Sport should teach us the value of inclusion, and this is fundamental for people's happiness. I gradually understood that you have to live with people's envy and jealousy, unfortunately. Well, German Paralympian Katrin Müller-Rothgart, who will compete against the Italian in the 200 metres, expressed her fear of Petrillo's advantage heading into the race because he trained as a man for a very, very long time. So is it only fair that Petrillo is banned from competing? To discuss this, I'm joined now by former British Olympian Mario Mauchi. Mario, great to see you again. Thank you very, very much. So, you know, are we just jealous here? Is this what it is? We're envious, are we?
Honestly, it's laughable, really. He's causing unfairness for huge numbers of female athletes. You know, males in the female category is unfair. It's unsafe in some sports. For him to describe critics of his, you know, causing this unfairness as jealous is frankly laughable. He is male. He's 50 years old. He should not be competing against the world's best female Paralympians.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things, as you rightly pointed out there, that make a mockery of this, don't they? I mean, the age, I suspect, as well, being another one to it. But, you know, there is another aspect, isn't it, which is, I would imagine, especially in the Paralympics, people have had to overcome, you know, an additional barrier to sport in many senses. And then to see a man turn up and compete and potentially snatch that gold away from you must be, you know, just an additional level of bad, really, I think.
Yes, I mean, I used to train with the British Paralympians, and what they've overcome is extraordinary in many cases. And, you know, the classes exist in parasport for a reason, which is to make competition fair. So if you then decide that men can go in the female category, you know, what is the point of having the Paralympic classes to make competition fair? It just renders the whole thing meaningless. One of the female athletes who was prevented from advancing to the final at the 2023 Paris World Para Athletics Championships, a woman from Indonesia, who she gets up at 5 a.m, she supports her family, goes training, then goes to work, trains again in the evening. She's only competing in the 100 metres because she was put out of the 200 metres and failed to qualify for the Paralympics. So, you know, many female athletes have been excluded because of Petrillo, and he talks about inclusion. This is only inclusion for males like him. It means exclusion for female athletes.
It's a psychology thing, isn't it, in a way? Because that individual has quite openly said in the quote that I read out before that, to paraphrase, I think that their right to happiness trumps everybody else's right to pretty much everything else. And I do have some serious question marks over the psychology of that. But one of my big concerns is, if you look at the Olympics that we had before, what were some of the main topics of conversation? It was the two people who many people regard as being men who were in the boxing. And that was the problem, OK? And now here we are again. And my concern is that actually, unfortunately, unless we do something about it, this is just the future of women's sport.
Yeah, I mean, there are echoes of the fiasco in the boxing in the Olympics, because the rules in this case are if you're legally female, you're welcome in the female category. And many countries have self-ID, so it's a piece of cake for any man to get a passport which says female on it. You know, it renders the male and female categories in sport totally meaningless. And people are talking about happiness. You know, that's all about him. He appears to have absolutely zero consideration for the impact he has on female athletes. And 30 female athletes complained about him a couple of years ago when he was demanding access to the female changing rooms.
There we go.
This is all about males breaking boundaries which exist for women and girls to live and participate safely in sport and society safely. You know, it's all about him. And what's a real tragedy here is the officials and governing bodies responsible for the rules have failed. He is just taking advantage of rules which allow males in the female category.
And in my view, they're needlessly fearful of a backlash that actually I think will be quite minimal, and will be quite minimal because it really does, in practical terms, affect quite a small number of people. But their inclusion in events like this can very often affect, well, literally everybody, can't it? But you raise a good point there, because it's easy to get obsessed with the pure sports of this, but there's a lot that goes on around it. Access to women's spaces is another key issue, isn't it? And that, again, is something that clearly is going on here. It's not just about what goes on the track or in the boxing ring. It's frankly, you know, it's who you shower next to as well, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. We've heard from Riley Gaines and Paula Scanlon, some of the other female swimmers who had to change many times a day with an intact male, William Thomas. You know, Glenn Frank on your programme said, of course I use the female changing rooms. You know, it's really appalling. It's absolutely about breaking down barriers. And you mentioned fear on the part of officials and governing bodies. That's the absolute nub of it. They really need to find some courage to stand up for fair competition and for safety, privacy and dignity for female athletes in the changing rooms associated with sport. Currently, they're just rolling over and acquiescing to the demands of the trans lobby, and the result is that sport has become a laughingstock.
And it's needlessly dominating discussions. You know, there will be people, especially at the Paralympics, and maybe I shouldn't be saying that really, but especially at the Paralympics, there are going to be so many tremendous stories that come out of it, and so many massive achievements, right, that people can only dream of. And you think if even just a little bit of that gets overshadowed in this sense by that individual there competing, then that is a real shame. But Mara, look, thank you very much. I'm sorry, we're about out of time now, I'm afraid, but I do hope to chat to you again very soon. It's Maria Mauchi there, who's a former British Olympian herself. Right, coming up, I'll tell you how much Harry and Meghan's PR trip cost the Colombian country, OK? Bear in mind it is a poverty-ridden country. Clue, the Colombians are furious about it. But next, I'll bring you the very first of tomorrow's newspaper front pages, and they're not to be missed. Stay tuned.
Good evening. Here's your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Most of today's showers are going to ease and clear away as we go through this evening and overnight, but our attention is turning to a weather system that is out in the Atlantic and is actually the remnants of Hurricane Ernesto. It's heading towards the UK and is going to bring some wet and windy weather to northwestern parts tomorrow. But for the time being, like I said, many of today's showers will be easing, some continuing though, especially across parts of Scotland and western parts of England and Wales. Otherwise, a a lot of dry and clear weather around, and with those clear skies, temperatures turning a little bit on the cool side, particularly towards the east-southeast, towards the north and west, a bit more cloud here and some brisker winds, so temperatures holding up that little bit higher perhaps. As we go through tomorrow morning then, it is going to be turning quite quickly, quite cloudy and a bit wet across the far west of Scotland, a brighter, drier part for eastern parts of Scotland and northeast England too. Cloud quickly spilling across Northern Ireland, so a grey start here and a bit damp in some parts as well. Some showers down the western side of England and Wales. For more central and eastern parts, it is going to be a mostly bright start, though there could be some high-level cloud making the sunshine a little bit hazy. Across central eastern parts of England, it is going to turn a bit cloudier as we go through the day, but staying largely dry. However, towards the north and west, we have that feature I mentioned at the start, and this is going to bring some very wet and windy weather, turning really pretty unpleasant. Feeling unpleasant then towards the northwest, but in the southeast, temperatures getting into the low 20s, so warm enough in any sunshine. More wet weather to come as we go through Thursday. The system will gradually make its way southeastwards, but it breaks up, diminishes a little bit as it goes. So in the southeast, just seeing a bit of cloud, bit of rain. It won't be as intense or as impactful as the wet and windy weather we're going to see in the northwest. Another spell of wet weather coming through on Friday, but signs of something drier through the long weekend.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Nana Acquia. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Patrick Christys tonight, and it's time to bring you a first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages. Let's do it. So we start with the Metro. Right, so they're all going in on this, really. Tech tycoon super yacht tragedy, hopes fade for the missing six. This is the super yacht that sunk, that everyone's been talking about all day now. Let's go to the Daily Express. Horror video shows yacht's final moments. So this is caught on apparently a villa's CCTV footage, and it reportedly shows the horrifying moment that Mike Lynch's £30 million super yacht is engulfed by a tornado and sinks in 60 seconds. If we go to the Daily Mail now, the story has shifted slightly onto the idea that somebody might still be able to survive if they are trapped in an air pocket. Could anyone still be alive is the headline they go for. There's talk about, you know, this idea that, yes, if they've managed to get to some kind of air pocket, that supposedly they could cling on, but unfortunately, you know, for obvious reasons, time is running out there. The Times, PM warned empowering unions will stifle growth. Employers fear that firms will be held to ransom. They've also got a story that, you know, traditionally would have arguably been more at home in the Daily Mail, but it says ham sandwich a day increases diabetes risk. Sometimes I would just like to occasionally, when I need a laugh, I go on and look at historically all of the things the Daily Mail have said will give you cancer, and it's an endless list of
Broken Heart is on there.
everything, strawberries, all sorts. But let's whiz ourselves over to the Telegraph. They have got this other angle on this super yacht story, which is that potentially the hatches were left open, that doors might have been left open, and that could have contributed to it. But there's a story here sandwiched in the middle of the Daily Telegraph, which says, I will lock up and deport more migrants. That is a statement from Yvette Cooper. So Yvette Cooper has pledged to detain more illegal migrants and carry out a record number of deportations. The Home Secretary will expand immigration detention centres as part of a plan to remove more than 14,500 illegal migrants in the next 6 months.
Isn't there like an estimated 1 million?
Yeah. Well, probably, yes. But go on, Steve. Look,
Well,
Steve,
I thought this was a headline from Viz. More than anything else, or maybe even the Daily Mail, you know, because quite frankly, the idea that Yvette Cooper, who was part of a political party that said we shouldn't be deporting in the same level, that the Conservatives party, that we should stop Rwanda, which was an attempt to try and move people away from this country, and now I'm going to be the person that deports en masse, is laughable. Yeah. Because firstly, she doesn't indicate where she's going to deport them to. As I've mentioned many, many times, the top 5 countries of people who are coming here who are failing the asylum processes are from countries that we will never return them to. Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Somalia, etc. So where's she going to deport them to? Vanuatu?
They say that they're going to work with European enforcement agencies to find every route into smashing the criminal smuggling gangs, organising dangerous boat crossings. OK. Apparently there's going to be an extra 290 detention spaces created at the immigration removal centres.
Why does it need this sophisticated...
Well, that's a
I'm
day,
just curious,
isn't it?
because it's not rocket science to, like, inflate a boat, put people on it, and then send them on their merry way. This whole, like, smashing the gangs as if there's some sort of evil Albert Einstein-like genius.
I mean, sitting there with his cap.
I knew someone who took those boats. It was literally... It couldn't be easier. He found his way from Ghana to Libya, got on a boat, and then got to Italy. It was literally simple.
40,000 people failed asylum last year who were due for deportation. 290 is a drop in the ocean.
Jonathan, do you think Yvette Cooper should even be saying stuff like this? Because the other side of it is if she can't do it for some... pretty straightforward reasons like, well, we don't have returns agreements with some of the key countries that they come to, etc., then she's made a rod for her own back, even if she wants to, which people might be quite sceptical of this idea anyway.
Well, I think she's, it's probably not a coincidence this is on the front page of The Telegraph. I think the Labour Party's strategy is to try and woo newspapers that will never support the Labour Party under any circumstances and try and sort of talk tough rhetoric on this issue. Look, I think that you have to... Well, ultimately, you'll have to judge governments based on what they do rather than what they say. Clearly, Labour, quite rightly in my view, suspended the Rwanda scheme, and I suppose that it will have to demonstrate that it has some kind of ideas on how to stop the gangs. Look, my views on this will be different from the Labour government's. I think that you should have things like asylum processing centres in France, for example, and you can allow safe and legal routes into the UK in order to claim asylum there, thereby sort of smashing the gangs that way. But clearly, we're waiting to see how the Border Security Command works, if it actually does work, and we can keep an open mind.
But, Jonathan, I'm really open about this. I've had this discussion before. How do you think it's going to smash the gangs if you have an asylum processing centre in France? The gangs are further up the chain. They're in Afghanistan. You're paying $50 to get on the back of the boat. From the back of a van, we've got the aerial visual imagery of that going off to Turkey. They'll just increase it.
And also, you can't smash the gangs if the people can never be returned. This idea, this is the thing. So this idea of like the safe and legal route, usually that point is a moot point because there are many people that came to the safe and legal route, have applied for asylum, have been rejected. I think it's around 300,000 who have not been removed, who will probably never be removed because there's no returns agreement. So whenever people talk about safe and legal routes, they never talk about the people that have gone through the system, have been rejected on public safety for public safety reasons, and haven't been removed. Abdul-Azidi being one of the... I mean, that story is just outrageous.
Clearly,
there are about 300,000 of those kinds of people in this country.
Look, if you have people who come from unsafe countries, who find themselves in the UK, who are able to get into the UK, then I don't know what the answer is.
No,
because if you can't return them...
Because they've gone through the process. This is...
I understand the issue. I understand
where Jonathan's argument comes along.
Where does it go?
How you stop the gangs by having a system there that just encourage them to get there.
Because, Stephen, the reason that people are coming on the boat is that there is no other way for them to come here. That's the point. So if you actually... And we know that when you did have an asylum system in place, then sort of 77%, I think it was, of those claims were found to be legitimate asylum seekers. So the point is that if you assume that sort of about 75% of claims will be accepted, you can have those claims processed in France and then allow people to come here safely and legally so they don't have to go on the boat.
OK, I think that's the kind of slight difference of point, though, isn't it, between a lot of people who I think we need to stop the boat crossings because of the people who are on those boats and their safety, versus a group of people who think that we should stop the boat crossings because we should stop people coming here. And there is a kind of idea...
On the issue of public safety. I mean, there's always this assumption that people fleeing war-torn countries were on the right side of the conflict. Like, there's never this assumption that those people could have actually been on the wrong side of the conflict. And we're
that's what it's meant. That's why they have processing.
Yeah.
So
but the thing is, you don't know anything about them. How do you process how? Like,
so these things are never going to be perfect. I mean, the point is, do we have?
If we reject them, do you really think France is going to accept them there?
Do we have a system where we are offering sanctuary for people fleeing war and terrible conditions? That's a basic question that I think we need to be asking. I think that the Labour Party is right to be asking that question.
And what about those who are just doing economic?
Well, I think, look, we can have a conversation. I'd be very happy to have a conversation with you about economic migration because I think it's a positive, but that's obviously separate from asylum, clearly.
All right, OK, now let's whiz ourselves on. Now, Harry and Meghan's 4-day quasi-royal tour of poverty-ridden Colombia cost an incredible 8 billion pesos, which is £1.5 million. That was the security cost, apparently. Local media claim the £375,000 a day cost involved 3,000 police and soldiers, plus helicopters, sniffer dogs and bomb disposal units. The trip was actually widely criticised by actual Colombians, and Cali City's right-wing councillor, Andres Escobar, told the Mail Online the country paid... You couldn't make it up, could you? The country paid almost $2 million for the security of this trip. And there are many, many Colombians who are hungry and have a lack of basic needs. As to, Harry and Meghan have been taking food out of poverty-stricken Colombian children's mouths.
Here's the thing, they just accepted a trip. I mean, I do find it peculiar that Harry... finds it safer to send him and his wife to Colombia than to come to the UK.
Yeah.
Just his ongoing... That being said, they were invited. This is a cost that was obviously the Vice President of Colombia was happy to foot. She clearly had her own agenda using those two. I think they were used as pawns, and I think there were distractions of 2 years into her vice presidency for the lack of progress and the fact that people are rightly angry. But I would like to say it's not their fault. I don't know if she actually got a lot of money, like her bang for a buck, out of this couple because, they're just not very interesting. Yeah, exactly. They're the world's most boring couple. I can't believe there manages to be a news story about this couple every week. They're not very interesting.
I mean, are they just doing PR for despotic regimes now? Is that their job?
So you said, what, are you calling Colombia a despotic regime?
Yeah, well, so, the president's son, right, is currently under investigation for money laundering, for funneling money from drug cartels to his own father's campaign.
That doesn't make it a despotic regime. It's a democratic... It's a democratic... Look, we're not going to have a conversation about domestic... We're not going to have a conversation about domestic...
Donald Trump's son was...
We've got to talk about Donald Trump's family now. I mean, my God.
He was despotic.
Well, no. Donald Trump would love to be bloody despotic. He wasn't, thank goodness, because we were rescued from his wannabe despotism. But look, I don't think it's particularly interesting to have a conversation about some domestic Colombian politics. Clearly, the Colombian vice president invited this couple over for reasons, whatever reasons they were, I don't know what they were.
Well, she saw them on Netflix. She
saw them on Netflix. Fine. You know what? And you know what? She had every right to invite them. The Colombian government had every right to bankroll it, and they had every right to accept. It's not a story.
Imagine if Keir Starmer
I wonder if she really found them as boring as most of us.
Well, if Keir Starmer was invited, someone that we can have a conversation about Keir Starmer. We're not Colombians. We're not Colombians.
Hold on. Imagine if Keir Starmer invited Sofia Vergara to the UK, which I would love because he was a fan of Modern Family. Like, on one level, we're like, oh, that's great. But on another level, are you taking the
Look, this is
You're spending millions
They are still the... Harry is still the son...
festival.
He's a son of the king. I mean, clearly, he's not a working member of the royal family, but it's totally... He's given speeches... He's given a speech to the UN Security Council.
You're not making a good case to the Colombian people who are deprived, because this man is not going in any diplomatic...
I have no view on whether the Colombian government should invite Harry and Meghan or not. If they want to do that and they want to fund it, that's entirely up to them.
I'll be happy the day when we don't have to talk about Meghan.
Oh, my God.
Oh, my goodness. I don't know why we're always talking about them. We don't need to be talking about them. It's just...
They are a little bit dull.
OK, well, on that bombshell, all right, coming up, I'll finally show you what happens next when this particular rocket looks as though it's about to take off, but does it? Yeah, that's right. It's the British rocket. Yeah, it's the British rocket.
Is it? Am I right?
Yeah, you're right. Anyway, right, OK, that's coming right after I deliver more of tomorrow's newspaper front pages. Stay tuned.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Recently, the cartoons that inspired the Bond films have been gifted to the Oscars archive.
I'm joined now by John's son, Sean McCluskey. Very good to see you. Welcome to GB News.
Thanks for having me.
Do you have any memory of your dad doing these strip cartoons?
Well, many memories. Yeah, we grew up with my father working at a pace. He had to turn in one strip every day, apart from Sundays. So he was always working at the house, and always taking reference material. He had models dropping in to shoot them with his camera. You'd go out in the garden and there'd be a guy with a machine gun and he'd be taking photos of him, things like that. Nice memories.
Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
What would you say about the way he characterised James Bond?
Fleming was very wary that his highbrow art was going to be somehow diminished by turning it into a strip cartoon in a newspaper, but he met with Fleming, and Fleming had a drawing made of what he wanted Bond to look like, and it was very old-fashioned, very sort of military. And my father kind of, jostled a little bit and came through with a much younger, much more lithe character. And through the first few strips, he moved Bond into a contemporary man, very much part of the 60s, and styled him in that way. And I think there's a lot of rumour that Sean Connery got the gig because he looked a lot like the drawings, because it's hard to believe now, but the strip was billboard advertised across the country.
GB News, the People's Channel.
OK, welcome back. It's Patrick Christys tonight, and I've got some more front pages for you. Let's do it. All right, start with the Mirror. Moving message as the end nears. Sven, my goodbye. Ex-England boss says, we're all scared of dying, but I've lived a good life. There we go. Let's go to the Eye. Brits without new €7 EU visa face being turned away at an airport in 2025. Well, we're going to talk about this because this is an aggressive spin on this story. All right. Anyway, they say that no special treatment for UK on looming travel rules. Lobbying by the Tories and government has failed to win a relaxation of new EU red tape. They say that British travellers won't be able to board a plane, train or ferry to 30 countries in the European Union unless they have a valid ETIAS visa waiver from spring next year. Airlines and holiday firms express concern that unprepared travellers will face disruption. We'll return to that. I'm going to...
Just get it.
I know, right? For €7, it lasts you. Let's just do it now. Look, who cares about the Guardian?
Less than the price of a Costa coffee.
Who cares about the Guardian?
Yeah, less than the price of a Costa coffee.
I care about the Guardian. I bloody care about the Guardian.
Oh, you read it out then, Jonathan. Go on, you care so bloody much about the Guardian.
Okay, fine. Reeves plans tax rise amid alarm over black hole.
Oh, I'm glad we did that. I am so glad.
Well, you are glad. We will have a right old Barney about that one. All right, as well. No, let's go back to your ETIAS.
We like the ETIAS.
All right, no, look, right, come on. So I spoke to someone. Right, in the room now, people. I spoke to someone earlier about this who explained it radically differently to me than what the Eye have chosen to do, and I'm willing to stand corrected. But this was my understanding of it, which is that if you spend €7, you get this essentially as a visa for the EU.
It's like an ESTA
that lasts 3 years, as far as I'm aware.
Which is a pretty good deal.
And it means that you're allowed to go through the EU queue. So you know all that thing about how at Brexit, we're going to go in the Brits only queue. Apparently this removes that. So for me, that's a good news story.
And then, they're unprepared. Are we children?
But there's another element to it, which is that starting from November, I believe, there's going to be huge disruption for UK travellers going to EU ports because for the first trip to the EU, before this ETIAS thing kicks in, you have to go fingerprinting. Well, you say that, Esther, but it's going to take quite like 30 seconds to a minute for each person, and it's just basically people at Dover are saying we don't have the capacity for that. People at Eurostar saying we need to have a much bigger terminal. So look, it's not going to be fun.
If you go to any airport in America, you've got to have that.
No. Well, when you go to America, there is a capacity for that.
Are you joking? When was the last time you went to the US?
Well, a few months
They
ago.
are so painfully slow, it's not...
Well, actually, it's to work similarly, actually, because now, once you've had your fingerprints done, you've got your essay, you can just go through quite quickly.
The idea is that...
Same thing.
This conceivably is just not an issue, really, is it? You think the biggest problem is that it'll take... There might be a couple of months of a transition period, there might be some delays.
Yeah. It's going to be... Look, it's going to... Right, and no one's saying this is probably going to be an issue in sort of 10 years' time, but from November for a few months, when it's your first trip to the EU, if you're going to the Eurostar, if you're flying to an EU airport, it's going to just increase delays and it's going to catch people out with the ETIAS.
Oh, all right. Now, in Jonathan's defence, I am going to now focus on The Guardian. Reeves plans tax rise amid alarm over black holes. So, Rachel Reeves is apparently planning to raise taxes and cut spending and get tough on benefits in October's budget amid the Treasury alarm that the pickup in the economy has failed to improve due to the poor state of the public's finances. You're right, OK, so is this not a broken promise?
Well, the thing is,
It depends how he's going to do it. I mean, she starts doing a tax broken promise. We increase taxes, broken promise. But, you know, at the end of the day, it was inevitable. It's part of the DNA. No, well, it's
they only ring-fence
DNA of the Labour Party to increase taxes.
They only ring-fence 3 taxes, so national insurance, VAT and income tax. So technically it's not a broken promise, but I think the idea, the kind of, oh my gosh, it's so much worse than I expected, well, that's not going to wash because the public's finances have been public for a long time. Yeah. I do think there are going to be some hard decisions, but again, I don't think they could have won either way. I'm just curious where this economic growth is suddenly supposed to come from, because that's what concerns me.
Well, Esther, I like the fact that you kind of conceded they couldn't have won either way. Look, I said all the time during the election campaign that I was absolutely sure that Labour would come at some point shortly after the election say it's much worse than we thought. That's what governments have always done. But to be fair to Reeves, the boss of the OBR did actually say that it was the truth. When she turned up to Parliament just before recess to talk about the winter fuel payments, etc., the OBR gave a letter to say, actually, we didn't know about all of the spending from the last Conservative government, so there was a black hole.
The thing is, she basically had to cancel anything that already didn't have funding attached to it. So it wasn't a £20 billion black hole. It was a speculation of what the Tories wanted to do, but they hadn't found the funding to attach to it. That's not to say it's a black hole. That is to say, if you want to continue to do this, you have to find the attachment.
And the black hole increases.
So that's why she cancelled all the
The black hole increases when you start putting your own spending issues in.
Exactly.
And that's why it's become bigger and bigger, because you're suddenly giving more to train drivers, more to doctors.
Well, everyone.
And everybody else that's going to help it. She has this issue, and I think it's a Sherlock issue.
To be honest, I think we should have let the train drivers keep striking.
All right, well, look, the budget is going to be one of the most compelling things that we've had recently. So there we go. Now, I'm going to whiz us along, actually. Oh, no, I'm not. Haha, here we go. What could have possibly happened next? Here's the moment a rocket exploded during a test at Britain's newest spaceport. So there we go. The test was being carried out. Showing saxophone spaceport. There we go. We're away, lads. It's what? That looks to me like it's on. Oh, that's a big fire, isn't it?
That's a big.
Yeah, that's a big. Oh, that's gone, hasn't it? That rocket. The rocket body, developed by a German startup, burst into flames seconds. What are you saying?
Right, OK, here we go.
Seconds after ignition, while on the launch pad last night, and the startup said the hot fire test of the first stage rocket resulted in an anomaly and the loss of the spacecraft. No one, thankfully, was injured in the process.
What are you implying?
We should do it ourselves next time. We should do it ourselves next time.
Are you implying that
rocket would never have blown up?
I know, okay.
If it wasn't made by...
Don't make me do my Thatcher impression again.
Rocket on there.
British rockets. A British rocket would never have exploded.
Yeah, here he is. Right, good stuff. OK, well done, everyone. Now it's time for Greatest Britain, Beauty and Jackass. Esther, who is your Greatest Britain?
King Charles, for visiting the families of the Southport victims.
Yes, indeed.
I think this was actually the perfect time to do that after the whole kind of the rioting and the whole ruckus of the last couple of weeks. And I do think it does matter that he's chosen to do this personally. It does send a very positive image.
Yes, no, I agree. Go on, sir, Stephen.
I'll go with Isabella Vaughan-Spruce for standing up to the ridiculous policing about silently praying in a particular place. It's an important part of protecting free speech in this country. We shouldn't be criminalising people simply for praying quietly in their own heads and not even vocalising it.
OK, all right. Jonathan, who's your greatest Briton, please?
It's an honorary one. It's Tim Walz, who is the Democratic vice presidential candidate. I think he's extremely relatable. He's great fun. There was a clip yesterday from the Democratic National Convention of him sort of sitting with his wife and his 2 kids doing bunny ears behind him, and he just thinking it was great fun and saying, "My kids keep me humble." And you kind of think, can you imagine Donald Trump's response if one of his children or 2 of his kids did sort of bunny ears behind him? This guy knows how to have a sense of humour. Yeah. He's the kind of, an everyman. I think a lot of Americans are willing to.
I mean, in Trump's defence, his granddaughter did do an entire speech about him just shortly after he got shot. It was quite funny. He didn't really seem to mind.
Maybe they have a different way of bonding.
Maybe
less funny as more like tongue-in-cheek humour.
Maybe, yeah, fair enough. Right, OK, today's winner is King Charles. There we go. All right. Who is your Union Jackass?
So the Cotswold Council, because they have 10 different bins to sort rubbish into, which is ludicrous. I mean, they have a separate bin for coffee pods.
No. How much coffee are people drinking in the Cotswolds?
Really? Well, but this is like, why can't they just go into like the normal recycling, like normal and recycling?
So does anyone actually do it,
Oh, I wouldn't do it.
No one's going to do it. It's completely counterproductive because people just say, well, you know what, I can't do this, I'm just going to give up.
Put coffee
actually,
on
people
your
regress.
Garden, it really works. I'm going to go for Lord Timpson.
The prisons man.
The prisons man, for opening up our jails to all and releasing 40,000 as the intention of all of those who've committed violent crimes and assaults and robberies and thefts, just so that they can put in our
And whose fault was that?
Mugs.
OK. All right, Jonathan, who's your Union Jackass?
Robert Jenrick. Who is widely tipped to be the next Conservative leader, God help them. Not for any Ozempic-related reason, because that's been the scandal, but because he's talking, controversy, shall we say. Yes, they're sort of arguing about which of them was taking Ozempic is a bit pathetic. Okay. But because of saying that he'd resurrect Rwanda if he becomes Prime Minister, just leave it, let it go.
Leave Rwanda alone.
Let it go.
Right, so today's winner is the Cotswolds Council. You've just seen it. Thank you, everybody who's watched. His headline is next. I'll see you tomorrow at 9. Mwah!
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Most of today's showers are going to ease and clear away as we go through this evening and overnight, but our attention is turning to a weather system that is out in the Atlantic and is actually the remnants of Hurricane Ernesto. It's heading towards the UK and is going to bring some wet and windy weather to northwestern parts tomorrow. But for the time being, like I said, many of today's showers will be easing, some continuing though, especially across parts of Scotland and western parts of England and Wales. Otherwise, a lot of dry and clear weather around, and with those clear skies, temperatures turning a little bit on the cool side, particularly towards the east-southeast, towards the north and west, a bit more cloud here and some brisker winds, so temperatures holding up that little bit higher perhaps. As we go through tomorrow morning then, it is going to be turning quite quickly, quite cloudy and a bit wet across the far west of Scotland, a brighter, drier part for eastern parts of Scotland and northeast England too. Cloud quickly spilling across Northern Ireland, so a grey start here and a bit damp in some parts as well. Some showers down the western side of England and Wales. For more central and eastern parts, it is going to be a mostly bright start, though there could be some high-level cloud making the sunshine a little bit hazy. Across central eastern parts of England, it is going to turn a bit cloudier as we go through the day, but staying largely dry. However, towards the north and west, we have that feature I mentioned at the start, and this is going to bring some very wet and windy weather, turning really pretty unpleasant. Feeling unpleasant then towards the northwest, but in the southeast, temperatures getting into the low